As my child grew up, so did a certain awkward trait, revealing a secret I'd kept for 26 years, and it caused chaos for everyone involved. I'm not asking for sympathy or trying to justify my actions, but I'd appreciate any positive advice you can give. My husband, Joe, didn't know about the affair and always thought Joe Jr. was his son. I also thought Joe Jr. was my husband's child until he was around 5 years old. Then I realized from his appearance that my husband wasn't his father. Let me explain how all of this happened and why I made the choices I did many years ago. My husband and I grew up in the same town but had very different upbringings. Joe grew up in a regular middle-class neighborhood with his mom, dad, and sisters. I, on the other hand, was raised by my mom and grandma, and we lived in Section 8 housing during my teenage years. My dad lived in a town 11 miles away. My mom had me when she was 17, married my dad at 18, and they got divorced 7 months later. Both my mom and dad had problems with alcohol and pills, both prescription and recreational. My grandma was also an alcoholic and smoked a lot. I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I just want to explain what led me to make some bad choices early in my marriage. After my parents split up, I only saw my dad 2 or 3 times a year, usually on my birthday and at Christmas, and sometimes in between. I know he cared about me, but he just couldn't take care of me because of his pills issues. After the divorce, my mom and I moved in with my grandma, and I stayed with them until I got married to Joe. Over the next 15 years, we moved 11 times because we couldn't pay rent or got kicked out. Sometimes we moved in the middle of the night, leaving the landlord stuck with unpaid rent for months. Every time I started to feel at home and make friends, we'd have to move again, and I'd have to start all over. It was really stressful. My mom and grandma changed jobs almost every year, sometimes even more often. They'd work different low-paying jobs until they got tired of it or got fired. They also stole from the places they worked, and they were both shoplifters as well, getting caught for stealing small things multiple times over the years. My grandma had my mom when she was 16 and never got married. Both my mom and grandma had lots of boyfriends over the years, including many one-night stands. None of their relationships lasted more than a few months. But I want to be clear, I was never left alone, and they always made sure I had food, clean clothes, and a comfortable bed. My upbringing wasn't typical. The environment wasn't good for growing up, and because of that, I ended up following the same path. In high school, I had 7 boyfriends, and one of them got me pregnant. Even though I wanted to keep the baby, my mom and grandma convinced me otherwise, just like they did when they were teens. I still regret it today. Then, a new person came into my life. Joe was like my guardian angel. He truly seemed like my perfect match. I met him while I was working at an ice cream stand in our town. One day, he walked up to the window and asked for my recommendation. We chatted for a few minutes, and within 5 minutes of meeting each other, he asked me out on a date. I was 17 at the time, and he was 21. Even though we were very different, we clicked right away. Joe was finishing up college and about to graduate, while I was finishing high school. He was a top student, and despite my challenging environment, I also did well in school, maintaining an A to B average. We started dating as friends for 3 months, and we didn't even kiss until my 18th birthday. I'll never forget that night. It was really special. He took me out to dinner on one of those old paddle wheel boats that cruised the river. After dinner, we stood on the deck admiring the beautiful scenery, and suddenly he hugged and kissed me, saying he loved me. I said it back. Things escalated quickly, and we fell deeply in love. Joe graduated and landed a job in the biggest city in our state. He didn't want to leave me alone in an unfamiliar place, so he asked me to move with him. We lived together for 4 months, and then decided spontaneously to get married at the courthouse. You might be wondering if Joe knew about my past. Yes, he knew everything. Our parents didn't know until we told them. My mom, dad, and grandma were happy for us, but Joe's parents were upset. They were okay with Joe dating me, but didn't want him to marry me because of my reputation in high school and my family's history with pills. Luckily, Joe didn't care about any of that, and we started our married life together. Joe bought us a small house in an up-and-coming neighborhood in the city, using money from his parents for the down payment and getting a high-interest loan to finance it. We struggled to make ends meet and had minimal furniture for a long time. Joe was busy with his new job, leaving me alone in our unfamiliar city. To keep busy, I found a job at a nearby frozen yogurt stand. It was a good way to get out of the house and meet people in the neighborhood. That's where I met our neighbors, Cheryl and Charles. They were in their early 40s. Charles drove trucks, and Cheryl was a stay-at-home mom with 5 kids. They were the only ones in the neighborhood who weren't wealthy, more like the folks I was used to. Once we got to know each other, I'd often hang out on their porch, chatting for hours. They were really kind to me and became like family, especially since Joe was working so much. But let me get straight to the point. One week, when Cheryl was in the hospital and Joe was out of town for work, Charles saw me after my shift and asked if I wanted to grab a bite to eat at a local fast food joint. I was tired after a 10-hour shift, so I said yes. After eating, we headed back to our street, and I mentioned to him about a leaky shower faucet we had that I couldn't fix. He offered to fix it, which he did, and then we sat on the couch and talked. We ended up being close that night. He left at 2 a.m. so nobody would see him. The next night, he sneaked over again after midnight and stayed until morning. After our second time, I felt really guilty, and we both decided to stop and not talk about it anymore. It's strange when I look back on those days now. I don't know why I did it. I wasn't attracted to Charles at all. He wasn't good-looking or muscular. He was short, wore old clothes, and didn't have much money. I think we bonded because he reminded me of my dad. After that, I focused completely on Joe and asked God to forgive me for what I'd done. I promised God that I'd spend the rest of my life making it up to my husband, which I've done. Joe came back from his trip, and we went back to our married life as usual, except now I was even more caring and loving than before. 6 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. Yeah, I knew there was a small chance the baby might not be Joe's, but I never thought it would happen. Joe and I were together every day, sometimes more than once, except for the 3 days he was away for work. I was only with Charles those 2 nights, and both times he made sure to pull out. After that, I never spoke to Charles or Cheryl again, and I never saw them either. About a week later, they moved out suddenly in the middle of the night, without saying goodbye to anyone. It turns out their house was being foreclosed, but they never told anyone. Instead, they just left before they could be evicted. Everyone in the neighborhood was surprised. My pregnancy was really tough, and I had to stay in bed for the last 2 months. My husband took care of me so well, and it just made me love him even more, if that was possible. When I was 19, I had our son, and we named him Joe Jr. Joe was over the moon, so proud to be a dad. At first, for a few years, I really believed Joe Jr. was Joe's kid, but by the time he was about 5, I could see he wasn't. While his hair and eyes looked like Joe's, his face, body shape, and even the shape of his head were just like Charles and his son's. My husband didn't know Charles or Cheryl that well, so I figured my big secret would stay hidden. Luckily, back then, we didn't have those home DNA tests like we do now. But then it happened. To make things worse, after Joe Jr. was born, my doctor told me I wouldn't be able to have any more kids because of the tough pregnancy and all the scarring it caused. When I found out, I asked Joe to adopt another child, but he said he was happy with me and our son and didn't want more. I kept pushing because I thought having another kid would strengthen our bond in case Joe Jr.'s real dad ever came out. Finally, after 5 years, Joe agreed, and we adopted our second son, who we call Stevie. Now, we were a happy family of 4. My boys looked up to their dad, and he adored them. They were really close, especially Joe and Joe Jr. Joe is tall and fit, over 6'2", while Joe Jr. is shorter and stocky, like his real dad. It bothered Joe Jr. because he wanted to be more like his dad, but couldn't match his physical or academic skills, no matter how hard he tried. But Joe didn't care. He always told Joe Jr. he was great just the way he was, and encouraged him to be himself. "Joe, don't try to copy me. Find your own path and do what makes you happy," he always said, boosting his confidence. Eventually, Joe Jr. found his passion in trade school, where he learned plumbing. Now, he has a good job, making good money, and he's married with a baby. Joe was his best man, and he named his son Joe III. It seems he adores his dad more than anyone else. This makes the next part of the story even harder. Joe Jr. lives about an hour away, but one day he showed up at my door unexpectedly. I could tell something was wrong. He came in, and we talked. He calmly explained that a man claiming to be his brother contacted him. My goodness. They did one of those home DNA tests and found out they were half-brothers. They managed to find each other online, and when they met, they gave him a copy of the results. To double-check, Joe Jr. took a DNA test himself, and it confirmed the same results. After sharing this with me and showing me the test, he broke down in tears, asking me how I could hide such a thing from him and his dad. I apologized and explained that I kept it hidden because I didn't want to hurt them. At that moment, I was too shocked to cry. All my focus was on comforting my son. After a few minutes of tears and silence, he looked up at me with anger and accused me of being a terrible person. I insisted I wasn't, and that it didn't matter who his biological father was because Joe would always be his dad. But then Joe Jr. said, "Yes, Joe is my father, but from now on, you are not my mother." With that, he stormed out. I called him, pleading for him to come back and talk, but he refused. Then I said, "We have to tell your dad." Hearing this, he exploded, warning me not to tell his dad anything. I said, "We have to. We can't keep this secret now that you know." He shouted at me, demanding I stay quiet, and then hung up. I tried calling and texting him, but all he said was, "Don't talk to my dad, and don't come to my place." That's when I couldn't hold back my emotions anymore. Joe didn't come home that night. He just sent a text at 7:09 p.m. saying, "I won't be home. I'm staying with my son." I knew he knew the truth now. I didn't want to add any more stress, so I let them be and cried all night, not getting any sleep. Joe and Joe Jr. built a small apartment attached to the garage on Joe Jr.'s property. I thought Joe would be staying there for the night. At 6:20 a.m., Joe walked through the door and came into the bedroom where I was lying. He sat beside me on the bed and asked me to explain everything. It didn't take me more than 10 minutes to explain, because there wasn't much to say. It was just 2 times over 25 years ago, and it meant nothing. I just kept apologizing and telling him how much I loved him. He seemed cold and said, "I'm filing for divorce. I'll stay with Junior until it's final." I was shocked and felt like I was going to pass out. I started crying and pleading, but Joe just packed his things without saying a word. I kept crying and begging, but he just told me, "Your tears won't change anything. Our relationship is over." Just like that. No discussion. Nothing. He said he already told his parents, sisters, and our son Stevie. I couldn't believe it. Hearing this made me feel even worse. Now I'm alone in this big house with no husband or family. None of them want anything to do with me. My mom, grandma, and dad are all gone, so I have no immediate family left. And I don't have any close friends to talk to, which is why I'm here. Given my situation, what should I do next? I feel shattered and don't want to live without my husband and boys. They mean everything to me. Without them, I feel worthless. Please, I need your help. I want to clarify a few things based on the responses I received earlier today. First, don't worry about me harming myself. I am a child of God and would never consider such a thing. Second, I have no intention of turning to pills or alcohol. Given my family's history, I gave up both when I got together with Joe and will never go back to them. Thank you. Your son summed it up perfectly. He said, "You're a terrible person. How could you keep this from them for 25 years when you knew how much they loved each other? You claim to have a strong relationship with God, but I find it hard to believe because lying every day for 25 years is a sin that's hard to forgive. I'd like to say I hope your husband and sons forgive you, but honestly, I hope they don't. However, I do hope your husband and son can eventually forgive you. Something similar happened to me when our son was 16. He was contacted by 2 of his half-sisters. My husband left me right away, and my son went to live with him. My husband got remarried the next year, and my son didn't talk to me for 25 years, and even now our relationship is strained. I wish you the best. I understand what you're going through. What you did was really wrong, but all sins, no matter how big, can be forgiven. Right now, the best thing you can do is nothing. Just give them space and time to process everything. My hope for you is that your husband and both of your sons can eventually forgive you and cherish the good times you've had together. However, I'd understand if your husband and older son struggle to forgive. If I were your husband, I'd file for divorce immediately and might even take legal action against you, maybe even for paternity fraud. And if I were your son, I'd cut you out of my life completely. You've shown yourself to be selfish and uncaring. What makes your actions even worse is knowing you couldn't have more children. This means your husband could never father a biological child with you, so you continued the lie and pressured him into adopting a child. Do you realize how deceitful this is? I hope one day you face the consequences, and I hope your husband finds happiness and has as many children as he wants. You're truly wicked. Thank you for your responses, everyone. Many rightfully criticized me, and I deserve it. I understand what I did to my husband and son was incredibly cruel and likely caused them psychological harm. I wish none of this had happened, and I deeply regret cheating. I still can't understand why I did it. It's not an excuse, but I was young and foolish at the time and heavily influenced by my upbringing with my mom and grandma. I know now that I should have told my husband about the affair right away, especially when it became clear that Joe Jr. wasn't his child. It was purely selfish of me because I didn't want to lose my family. I couldn't bring myself to say anything because my husband and son were so happy and loved each other deeply. Writing this down makes me cry so much. Okay, I had to get that out right away. So, what's happening now? My husband and I are living apart and haven't talked since my last update. He's still living in Joe Jr.'s garage apartment and has filed for divorce. The only communication I've had with Joe has been a couple of texts. Joe Jr. completely despises me. I've spoken to his wife once or twice a week to check on things there. She mentioned that my husband has forgiven me and wants to move on. How could he feel this way? She said, Joe Jr. won't forgive me and won't forget what I did. Fortunately, Stevie came over yesterday, and we had a good conversation. We're back on speaking terms, but he's still keeping his distance. I've sent several sincere emails, texts, and messages online to my husband and Joe Jr., but they haven't responded. Right now, my husband is going ahead with the divorce, and there's really nothing I can do to change his mind. I could make things tough, but I won't. Actually, if that's what he wants, I'll make it easy for him. It's the least I can do to show him how much I love and value him. Before I finish this update, let me address a question that keeps popping up about Charles and Cheryl. Sadly, they're both deceased now. Their kids say Charles passed away more than 16 years ago, while Cheryl just passed away last year. That's why their children did the ancestry testing. They wanted to learn more about their parents' extended families. While I was truly saddened to hear about their deaths, it simplifies the situation regarding biological parents. This will make things somewhat easier for both Joe Jr. and Joe. I hope they're both resting in peace in a better place, and I hope Cheryl can one day forgive me for the brief involvement I had with her husband all those years ago when I was 18 years old. The second question that keeps popping up is whether Charles was aware of Joe Jr. Nope. As I mentioned before, they moved away right after I found out I was pregnant, and I lost touch with them after that. Also, keep in mind, I believe Joe Jr. was actually Joe's son until he was about 5 years old. That's all I have to share for now. Thanks for all the responses to my story. After more than 2 years, I figured I'd come back here and give an update on my life story if anyone is still interested. Since all the lockdowns began, I've been spending most of my time online, like I'm sure many of you have too. Let me start by updating you on my marriage to Joe. We've been divorced since December 2017. I did everything I could to salvage our relationship, but when he learned about my affair and the truth about Joe Jr.'s paternity, he was finished with me. I admit what I did was awful, but I can't grasp how someone can suddenly shut off their feelings like he did. One day he was deeply in love with me, enjoying life, and the next, all the love was gone. I just can't comprehend how that's possible. Joe didn't care that I was only 18 when it happened, or that it was over 25 years ago. He was done with me, plain and simple. His reaction to everything shattered me inside. While we're talking about Joe, I'll mention he's now engaged to marry a woman he worked with for 13 years. She's 34, and he's 51 now. He wasted no time moving on after our divorce was finalized. Great. I think he was involved with her while we were still married, but my daughter-in-law insists that's not true. She claims they only started dating after we got divorced. According to her, Joe Jr. and Stevie will both be the best men at their dad's wedding. She also mentioned that my ex-husband's fiancée is an amazing woman, and they're planning to have several kids together. Once they tie the knot, she's quitting her job to stay home with the kids. It's tough for me to hear, but I genuinely wish them all the best. I once suggested to Joe that we adopt another child or even more, but he shut down the idea. Now he's planning to have multiple kids with his new wife. It stings, even though I know it's different. Although it's been several years since our divorce, I'd trade places with Joe's wife in a heartbeat. I'm glad to say that Joe Jr. and I have started talking again about a year ago, but it's always me who reaches out first, and he usually responds with short answers. Stevie does the same, although he sometimes asks me questions. It seems like my sons view me as a villain and only engage with me when they have to. My daughter-in-law, Joe Jr.'s wife, has been like a guardian angel throughout the divorce, helping me reconnect with both Joe Jr. and Stevie. She's incredibly wise and has been a supportive spouse and parent. She tells me the hard truths, even if they sting, and I appreciate her honesty. She's truly wonderful. I think that covers everything I wanted to say. I wish I had better news, but things are slowly improving each day. Joe was fair in the divorce settlement, and now I have a job doing data entry at the university, so finances are stable. I'd trade everything to salvage my marriage, but that's not possible. Thanks for reading my post and for your support. Take care and stay well. Learn from my mistakes, please.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
Story 2. Linda Richards pulled into her driveway and hit the button to open her garage door. As she drove in, she noticed her husband's truck wasn't there. Maybe he took the kids out for dinner, she mused. It seemed a bit late for that, but then she remembered it was Friday evening, and the kids didn't have school the next day. She grinned at the idea of Jack looking after the kids for once, as she often felt like she was caring for 3 children, not just 2. Exiting the car, she stepped into the house. With darkness already outside, the quietness inside the home, where she lived with her husband and kids, felt unsettling without the usual glow and sounds of video games from the TV. Recalling her earlier rendezvous with her lover Michael, a hint of guilt flickered, but quickly faded. Surveying the dim, silent house, she pondered if this would be her reality if Jack decided to call it quits on their marriage. After a moment's thought, she chuckled and headed upstairs. No way, she thought. If Jack was going to leave, he would have done it by now. She'd been seeing Michael for 8 months, and Jack never questioned her excuses. Initially, she'd visit Michael once or twice a week, but lately, she'd spend as many as 4 evenings at his place, even Fridays, covering up for Jack. She was pretty certain Jack had caught on to her actions, but he never confronted her. He didn't even question her when she fibbed about attending a weekend conference in New York about a month ago. The reality was, she spent that weekend with Michael in New York, who was the only one actually attending the conference. She was his guest for the whole weekend. Now, they were planning to go on a week-long cruise together. They just needed to come up with an excuse that Jack would buy. She headed upstairs, undressed, and hopped into the shower, aiming to feel as fresh as possible for her husband's return with the kids. In case Jack wanted intimacy, she wanted to be clean. Though he hadn't been romantic with her lately, she didn't anticipate it tonight. Yet, she mused, you never really know. She slipped under the covers and drifted off to sleep swiftly. The next morning, she woke up expecting to find her husband beside her, but he wasn't there, and his side of the bed looked untouched. She paused, straining her ears for any other sounds in the house. Maybe they're outside, she pondered. She got up, threw on her robe, and scanned the house, but found no signs of them. Peering outside, she wondered if they were in the yard, but the space was empty. Racing around, she called out their names, but no response came. Anxious, she checked the garage, finding Jack's truck still absent. Dashing back upstairs, she checked the closet, noticing all of Jack's belongings were gone. Rushing to the children's rooms, she saw their things were missing too. Has he really left? She grabbed her phone, dialing Jack's number, only to be met with a disconnected message. Oh no, she cried out. Dialing Jack's parents in Southern California, she hoped they might have some information. Mom, it's Linda, she said, when Jack's mother picked up. Have you heard from Jack and the kids lately? No, Linda, I haven't, replied Lorraine, Jack's mother. Is everything okay? No, Linda replied solemnly. Last night when I got home, they were gone. I thought they might be out for dinner, but they never came back. When I tried calling Jack, his number was disconnected, Lorraine explained. You might want to consider contacting the police and reporting them missing, she suggested. I'll do that, thank you, Linda replied. After their conversation, Linda headed to the kitchen for a cup of coffee. There, she noticed an envelope next to the coffee pot with Jack's ring atop it. Curious and anxious, she opened the envelope and found a typewritten note from Jack. Sitting down with her coffee, she read the note. "Linda," it began, "in case you haven't realized, I'm leaving. The kids are with me and they're okay. It seems you forgot that yesterday was our 15th anniversary. Instead of being with me, you chose to be with Michael Freeman, but honestly, I'm not surprised. This isn't the first time you've missed an important family event. Last month, it seems you forgot that Jason turned 13. I told him you were tied up with work and couldn't make it, but I knew you were actually in bed with Freeman. Remember how you did the same thing for Allison's birthday 3 months back? She was devastated when she found out you chose your lover over her. And what about Jason getting hurt playing football at school 2 months ago? You weren't there for him because you were with Freeman. The school tried calling you, but you said you were in a meeting. Then, imagine my shock when the investigator told me you and Freeman were getting cozy at the Hilton that day. I've known about your affair with Freeman for a while now, and so do the kids. I also know about that supposed New York conference and the cruise you two are planning. You don't have to lie to me anymore. You chose Freeman over your family, so I took action. I hoped you'd end it with him and come back to be my wife and the mother of our children. Maybe we could have fixed things, but you decided against it. You've been pretty much absent lately, so now it's my turn to take action. I'm leaving, and since you seem uninterested in the kids, I'm also suing Michael for alienation of affection, which is a crime here. I might not be able to do it, though. I'm also suing Michael for alienation of affection. I may not be able to do it. I'm also suing Michael for alienation of affection because it's illegal here. I might not get much, if anything, but that's not the point. It's about the principle. You see, I teach kids that bad decisions come with consequences. Since you picked your lover over the kids and left them with me for 3 or 4 nights a week while you were with Freeman, I'm asking for custody of the kids, and you might have to pay child support. Since you earn well, I'm not asking for spousal support. I won't stop you from seeing the kids, but you'll have to get a passport and pay for your own travel because we're moving to Australia. I got the promotion and will be in charge of our company's operations there for at least the next 5 years. I wanted to share this good news with you, but you kept spending your evenings with Freeman, so I never got to celebrate my promotion with you. You'll find a signed resignation letter in my desk's top drawer. I'm leaving you the house and half of our bills. I removed my name from everything, so it's all yours now. Enjoy. By the way, if you contest the divorce, you could end up being the next internet sensation in porn. Besides your resignation letter, you'll find a package with some explicit photos of you and Freeman together. These are just a few clips from the many hours of video I recorded with both of you. I wish I could say the last 15 years were great, but I can't. The first 13 were okay, and I gave you all my love, but obviously it wasn't enough for you. You've been distant for the past year or so, and you've rejected all my attempts to reconcile, offering weak excuses for your constant absence. You might have noticed that we haven't been intimate for a while. Honestly, the idea of being with you now disgusts me. You might have thought I didn't care about what you did because I never physically stopped you. You know I'd never force you or tell you what to do. That's just not who I am. But the truth is, you hurt me more than you realize, and I can't get past it. So please spare me the cliches and nonsense. You should know that in all the years we were together, I never even considered cheating on you. You and the kids were always my top priority. But for the past 8 months, you haven't been there for any of us. Now it feels like we don't even exist. I hope it was worth it for you. Don't try to reach out to me or the kids. They might reach out to you if they want, but I'll warn you, they're not too happy with you right now. If you need to say anything, talk to my lawyer. Their business card is in this envelope. Goodbye, Linda. The letter ended with a simple signature, Jack. With tears in her eyes, Linda folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. She placed Jack's lawyer's business card on the table, deciding to call on Monday. She dialed Michael's number on her cell phone, and he picked up after the second ring. "What happened?" Michael yelled when she explained Jack's actions. "That guy. You said he was okay with everything. I figured he knew, but he never tried to stop me," she said. "Now, they're all gone. What do I do?" she cried out. "Should I come over?" he offered. "Please," she pleaded. Michael headed to the house, ignoring the man parked nearby in an ordinary car. "Thanks, Mom," Jack said to his mother, after she finished talking to Linda. "You're welcome, son," she replied, embracing him. "Promise me you'll call when you arrive in Melbourne," she said. "I will, Mom," he assured her. The kids hugged their grandmother one last time, and all three of them went to the airport. It marked the beginning of a new journey for the children and the end of a 15-year chapter for Jack. A part of him felt a twinge of longing for Linda, but another part felt relieved to be free from her. After enduring 8 months of her affair with Freeman, he felt like it was a fresh start. He decided it was time to begin anew. True to his word, Linda was handed divorce papers at her workplace the following Monday. The process server publicly announced the reason for the divorce: adultery and neglect. Linda felt a wave of embarrassment as her co-workers glanced at her. Michael Freeman was being sued for causing alienation of affection. Linda reached out to Jack's lawyer, who advised her to either sign the papers or seek her own legal representation. After consulting with several attorneys, she realized Jack's offer was as reasonable as it could be given the circumstances. Reluctantly, she signed the papers and sent them back to Jack's lawyer. Meanwhile, Jack had settled into his new apartment in Melbourne, and the children were adjusting to their new surroundings, although it took some time for them to feel at home. Jack carefully read the email from his lawyer, eager to see the latest updates. He was glad to hear that Linda had signed the papers, but he wasn't happy about her moving Michael into their old house. Well, he thought, it was bound to happen sooner or later. The divorce went through quickly because Linda didn't contest it. The court ordered her to pay a bit of child support, which she did without any fuss. Jack didn't really need the extra money, so he put it into a college fund for the kids. Freeman settled things with Jack's lawyer outside of court, and that money also went into the children's college fund. Over the next couple of years, Linda sent the kids Christmas and birthday cards, along with a short note to each of them. From these notes, Jack found out that she sold the house and got married to Michael, who later cheated on her. After a bit of online searching, Jack discovered that the woman Michael was seeing was married herself, and her husband wasn't too pleased about being deceived. As a consequence, both Michael and the woman faced consequences, and the husband ended up behind bars. Jack wasn't surprised at all. Once a cheater, always a cheater. Linda kept promising to visit the children, but never followed through. Jack wasn't shocked by this either. Eventually, the kids stopped taking her promises seriously and began to see them as empty words. Over time, the postcards and letters became less frequent, and after 3 years, they ceased altogether. On the flip side, Jack met Chloe, a lovely blonde woman, originally from Adelaide. She had moved to Melbourne 5 years prior, after her husband left her for someone else. They dated for nearly a year before Jack proposed. "Are you sure about this, Jack?" she asked. "You know I can't have children, and that's what led my first husband to leave." "Your first husband was a fool. I've never been more certain of anything in my life," he replied. "I love you deeply and want to spend the rest of my days with you." "I love you deeply too, Jack," she said. "I want to spend my life with you, but what about your kids? Will they accept me as their stepmom?" "Let's ask them," Jack replied. The next day, Jack and Chloe were at his place watching the kids. "Guys, I love Chloe and asked her to marry me," he told them. "But I want to know what you think. Will you welcome her as your stepmom?" "No," Allison said, surprising Chloe. Jack looked at his daughter in shock. "Why?" he asked. "Because, Dad," Jason chimed in, "we want her to be our mom, not just a stepmom." "Is that true?" Chloe asked. "Do you want me to be your mom? But what about your real mom?" "She gave up on us long ago," Allison explained. "So if you're marrying Dad, you should be our mom. Are you ready for that?" Chloe was stunned, then looked at Jack and back at the kids, embracing them. "Of course," she said, tears rolling down her face. "I'd love to be your mom." A couple of months later, Jack and Chloe tied the knot in a small outdoor wedding. Allison stood by Chloe's side as her maid of honor, while Jason was Jack's best man. After 5 years, they all came back to the U.S. for a short trip. Jason got into the Air Force Academy, so they planned to drop him off there after a brief stop in Southern California, where Jack introduced Chloe to his folks. Then they flew to Denver, where Jack had a meeting with his boss and the board of directors before heading back to Australia. As they headed towards the elevator in the hotel, Jack heard a familiar voice. "Jack, is that really you?" a woman's voice called out. Jack turned and saw his ex-wife Linda approaching. She looked like she'd aged 20 years since he last saw her, thin, with streaks of gray in her hair. "Linda?" he said in surprise. "Yes, it's me," she confirmed. "Who are these people? Aren't you going to introduce me?" she asked, pointing at Chloe and the kids. "You don't even recognize your own children?" Jack questioned. "The ones you haven't even greeted in the past couple of years?" "Oh my God," Linda gasped. "You've grown so much, and you look so healthy." "Well, who's this young lady?" she inquired, pointing at Chloe. Jack couldn't resist grinning. "This is our mom," Jason proudly declared, with a touch of an Australian accent. "Her name's Chloe," Allison chimed in. "Now she's our mom." Linda took a step back in disbelief. "Your mom?" Linda questioned. "But I'm your mom." "No," Jason firmly replied. "You gave birth to us, but you stopped being our mom a long time ago, about the same time you stopped being Dad's wife." Linda looked like she might faint, and an older man in a suit approached her. "Linda, are you okay?" he inquired. She shook her head as tears streamed down her cheeks. The man helped her sit down and then glanced at Jack, Chloe, and the kids. "Who are you folks?" he asked. "What did you do to her?" "We were just passing through," Jack explained. "All we did was remind her of something she once had, but threw away. And who are you?" "I'm Carl Williams," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Linda's future husband." "Getting married, huh?" Jack inquired. "Well, I hope things go better for you than they did for me. Are you her first husband?" Carl questioned. "Yep," Jack confirmed. "Ah, I see," acknowledged Carl. "Linda mentioned you and the kids to me. Did she tell you what happened?" Jack asked. "She said it was the biggest mistake of her life," Carl replied. "Yeah, and it cost her everything," Jack remarked. "Anyway, best of luck to you. You'll need it. Catch you later, buddy." With those words, Jack, Chloe, and the kids headed to their rooms, leaving Linda in tears. "Was she really your first wife?" Chloe asked as they went upstairs. "Yup," Jack replied. "And let me tell you, I've definitely changed since then." "Yeah, you have," Chloe agreed with a smile.